31st of May, 1942, noon turns the Dnieper roofs to mirrors and the air to syrup. Flies stipple the rice the way black pepper freckles eggs back home, and the smell in the hospital hut is a blend of latrine, boiled cloth, and the sweet sour note of bodies failing. Private First Class Sam Doc Harlan chalks a slanted 44 on a bamboo stretcher slat, then slips the nub of chalk into his pocket as if it were morphine. It is not morphine. There is no morphine. There is no sulphur, and the quinine is a rumour passed like contraband hope between bunks. Outside, a Japanese corporal strolls past the dispensary door and touches the padlock with one finger, a small inspection, a promise that the hasp will hold. Camp O'Donnell is not a prison so much as a gravitational well. Everything collapses toward its centre: canteens, hope, weight. Men who staggered off the Bataan Peninsula in April have been funnelled here by trucks and by feet, past ditches glittering with empty tins, past mileposts that stopped mattering to men who count by steps now. The road still holds the scuffed shadow of the death march, 66 to 100 kilometres, depending on where a man was swept up, through furnace heat and thirst that made small things cruel, the sight of a full canteen on a dead man's belt, the guard who poured water onto the road the way a farmer dusts seed. Harlan carries that road inside his bones like an ache that wakes him at night. He learned triage on the fly. He boils water in a dented mess tin because boiling is chemistry he can afford. He pads fevered tongues with undershirt cloth and watches ankles the way a banker watches ledgers. Ankles tell him what Beriberi has already subtracted. He calls medic out of habit, even though he is the medic, and the only thing that comes is Luz Alonso with a contraband aspirin wrapped in brown paper and eyes that are part prayer, part arithmetic. She tells him in a whisper shaped like guilt that the guards turned the Philippine Red Cross away again. The ledger did not permit it. The Japanese lieutenant the prisoners call Nakamura carries Senjin-kun folded into his breast pocket like a catechism. Never live to experience shame as a prisoner, the code says, and the logic runs downstream from that sentence like oil on water. If captivity is shameful, then comfort is indulgence. If surrender is rot, then medicine is fertilizer for weakness. In the ledger Nakamura keeps, rations and work quotas and sick bay limits are columns to be balanced. A line of ink can outvote a pulse. He is not the villain in his own mind, only a competent officer keeping order with the tools doctrine provides. By the end of May, the death rate has its own rhythm. 44 bodies today, lifted on bamboo stretchers by men who must stop twice on the way to the cemetery because their legs are more sticks than legs now. Dysentery is bad water rendered into science. Malaria is the mosquito turned statistic. Beriberi is numbers written under skin. Harlan counts by habit because names, when he can get them, are a heavier ledger and deserve better paper than he has. He says a name aloud before he sends a body to the trench so the sound can go with the man. That too is medicine, spoken, not swallowed. The heat is a thing with weight. It glues shirts to spines and fuses salt to eyebrows. In the afternoon the tin roofs pop as they expand, then pop again when a breath of wind slides the shadow of a cloud across the camp and everything lifts for a heartbeat. The men talk about rain the way farmers talk about prices. They talk about Iowa and Luzon and the gap between them. They talk about medicine in the future tense, would have, could have, might have. A single sulphur packet, Harlan says, would likely turn 3 fevers this week, maybe 10. He touches the pocket where he keeps his chalk and feels the small heat of it against his thigh. He washes his hands in water the colour of weak tea and dries them on a shirt that is not dry. Out by the wire, a guard smokes and watches a dust plume that might be a truck and might be hope. Inside the dispensary, behind the hasp that a crowbar could break if a crowbar were not a fantasy, shelves sit like empty picture frames. The camp smells of smoke and stomach and the faint medicinal promise of carbolic that never arrives. Harlan thinks of glass vials and of labels crisp as Sunday shirts, of crates marked in a clean black hand. Penicillin. He has never seen one. He can nonetheless hear the rattle of a clipboard and the distant chorus of a factory whistle. Evening arrives like a tired man. Someone hums 3 bars of a hymn and forgets the next line. Earth thuds onto wood at the cemetery, methodical, respectful, because repetition is the last courtesy they can afford. Harlan pictures the route that brought them here, Mariveles to San Fernando to Capas, and then imagines a line on a map running the other way, from a loading dock to a hospital ship to a field dispensary that is not locked. Somewhere a fermenter begins to breathe. Somewhere a time clock rings men back from lunch. Somewhere abundance is tallied not as sin but as policy. When the breeze freshens, Luce says a name and Doc repeats it, and for a second it sounds like a homecoming roll call. He looks at the lock, at his hands, at the slice of sky above the razor wire. A bird flares and turns and vanishes into the bright. Tomorrow will count itself if he lets it. He sets the chalk down anyway, as if refusing to prepare the ledger might change the math. Dawn stains the tin roofs with a pale metallic light, and Lieutenant Nakamura stands under the eave with his ledger held flat on one palm, the way a priest might hold a missal. He dries the ink with the side of his hand, then folds the cover closed and slides it into the pocket above his heart where Senjin-kun also rides. The men under him call him Doctor, though his training is arithmetic, not anatomy. He believes he is the most merciful kind of officer, consistent. Consistency, he would tell a board of inquiry, is the essence of discipline. It keeps the line straight when the world tilts. His education carries the chill of marble halls. The 1929 Geneva POW Convention never bound the empire. Surrender is an ethical failure in the literature he studied, not a legal category. He can quote the Field Service Code as easily as he can read a weather map, and the sentences braid into policy that feels like gravity: never be taken alive, never live to experience shame as a prisoner, regard the enemy captive as a man who has already abandoned his duty. From those axioms, everything else descends. Rations become a test of will. Medical stores become a function of usefulness. The ledger becomes a map with no exits. He sets ration scales with the cool of a surveyor. Labour battalions must meet quotas, and the sick bay must not rise above a limit established last month when the numbers were better. He writes "admissions restricted" in a tidy hand and places a small dot beside it. His own system for remembering what he will claim he never decided. If a prisoner collapses on a work detail, the cart can take him to the hospital row or to the trench. The difference looks like mercy and feels like logistics. The cartwheels are the same width either way. Luce stands at the gate with a brown paper bundle containing bandages and aspirin scrounged from households in town. The guard looks past her the way a man looks past a stray dog searching shade. She asks politely if the Red Cross truck might, today, be admitted. The guard blinks. Documents, he says, though both of them know the answer is doctrine, not paperwork. A truck came once and was sent away. The rumour grew a spine, but never grew legs. She waits long enough to learn again what waiting teaches. The ledger is a door that opens inward only. Doc Harlan, summoned, presents a casualty list composed in pencil and sweat. He does not argue. Arguing is a currency the camp will not accept. He offers facts like rations, dysentery lines spiking after the last rain, malaria thicker along the ditch where mosquitoes hatch and the water shines like oil. He says the words sulphur and quinine, as if saying them might conjure substance from air. Nakamura nods the way an officer nods when a sergeant suggests initiative. He writes 2 lines, sick detail expanded and admissions restricted, and feels that he has done the priestly thing, balanced sin with penance. Some days he believes his system is compassionate because it spares the men a longer dying. Other days he believes compassion is a Western word for weakness. On all days he believes that order must be preserved. He walks the rows with hands behind his back, pausing only to listen for a cough that signals malingering or a voice that carries insubordination. He does not step into the hospital hut. He does not need to. Numbers transmit their sense indirectly. Fewer bodies moved means less work time lost. More bodies moved means work continues unimpeded tomorrow. From beyond the wire comes the sound of a truck, the low utility of it, like a ship's engine in a harbour fog. The gate does not open. Somewhere down the road, a farmer flogs a carabao up the last slope. A thunderhead piles like steel above the distant hills. Nakamura adjusts the strap of his pistol and considers assigning extra men to dig a new latrine farther from the cookhouse, to pretend sanitation can be subtracted from ideology. It will help for a few days. The rains will come all the same. Flies will follow regulation the way they follow meat. At evening formation, he reads orders from the 14th Army with the cadence of a man used to syllables standing at attention. Work quotas remain. Medical stores are prioritized for operational units. He is an operational unit in his mind, a mechanism that converts calories into labour. He tells the guards to keep the sickbay orderly. He means empty. He signs 3 requisitions that will not be filled, then puts the ledger to bed under his pillow, a habit learned the night a sentry borrowed it to settle a bet about totals. He thought his heart would fail until it was returned. When he sleeps, the code on thin paper warms against his chest, and he dreams of a ruined bridge he once helped repair, planks squared under boot heels, everything briefly straight and square. In the morning he will dry the ink again and call that straightness justice. He cannot imagine a world where medicine is mass-produced like ammunition and issued without ledger limits. He cannot imagine abundance as a doctrine because he has never seen it in uniform. He has seen only scarcity in parade step. The rain begins after lights out, fat drops thudding onto tin in a pattern that could be applause or warning, depending on a man's conscience. Nakamura does not wake. He will in the morning, when the hospital row smells like a flooded ditch, when Doc brings a list with more names than lines. He will balance columns because columns are what he has. The lock on the dispensary will hold. The gate will hold. The mind will hold, for now. In a Midwestern plant whose town name a POW could not guess, a foreman rings a brass bell and a line of workers in denim and oil-stained gloves steps into the river of a new shift. Tanks the height of 2 men exhale a faint warm breath. Steam ghosts a concrete ceiling blackened by months of hard running. A clipboard clicks. A chemist checks a gauge that measures a culture's appetite the way a farmer watches a calf take milk. What the vat grows will become stoppers sealed under glass, the kind of glass Doc Harlan imagines at dusk, labelled in a hand crisp as Sunday, penicillin. Numbers have rhythms too. Last year, medicine meant ampules counted by thousands, a miracle rationed like silk. This year, the curve bends upward so violently it looks like a misprint. What had been measured in millions becomes billions, and then a figure so large a foreman jokes that if you poured it into the river, all the fish would live forever. He is wrong, but the spirit is right. The factory is the opposite of a prison. Everything flows outward, vials, boxes, instructions, toward men who have not yet learned their names will matter beyond the wire. Atabrine tablets, bitter as a lie and yellow as a school bus, clatter down chutes into tins. Quinine sauces were lost when Japanese flags rose over colonial plantations. Industry did not pray about it. It engineered around it. Malaria is not a fate. It is a throughput problem. You plan for the mosquito as you plan for the enemy fleet. You issue doctrine in pill form and call it discipline. Men in khaki will take these tablets under a sergeant's stare because they want to live and because living has been made into a matter of drill. Outside, a freight train groans. A stevedore in a Liberty shipyard wipes sweat from his brow and watches a new hull slide into the water while the hull before it still trails the tug's wake. The statistic is so large it sounds like boasting until you count the keels. 2,000, then more, a parade of steel that could shoulder the sea aside. A single American yard in a single week lays down more cargo tonnage than some enemies had planned for a year. In an hour, one line of this city might stamp more ampules than a garrison hospital in Manila issued in all of 1941. The impossible becomes ordinary, and that is victory's real weather. A machinist named Rosie, nobody knows her last name beyond the time clock, files a burr from a pump's impeller and swaps it into place with a tap that sounds like a tuning fork. A truck driver backs to a dock stenciled with the names of theatres like destination postcards: Pacific, CBI, SWPA. The words are maps that workers carry home on their tongues when they lift their kids from the high chair and smell the machine oil still parked in their fingerprints. There are no parades here, only schedules. Schedules, and the understanding that if the whistle does not blow at 1600, another man will die of something a pill could have turned. The plant smells like yeast and solvent and warm rubber. A safety poster reminds the crew that losing a glove is cheaper than losing a hand. A calendar carries the face of a movie star nobody in Camp O'Donnell will ever see again. The foreman signs off on a lot number and chalks it beside a doorway. Chalk is a language in both worlds. In one, it totals the dead. In the other, it proves the living have a plan. The symmetry would make a poet cry if a poet had clearance for the floor. The train carries boxes toward a port where cranes walk the water on steel legs. A freight clerk stamps a manifest that will pass through a colonel's office and a quartermaster's depot, and then through hands that will place tins into packs so ordinary that nobody will photograph them. They will make no sound when they stop a fever. They will earn no headline when the platoon does not go down with the shivers by the swamp. But absence is its own report, and the ledger of men present for duty is the kind of headline an army needs. Across the ocean, Doc Harlan looks at a lock he cannot break and thinks about a warehouse he has never seen. He cannot know the number the foreman mocked into a joke this morning, the figure that would sound like inflation if it were money. He only knows the bodies weigh the same in May as they did in April, and the sun knows how to climb. He knows Luce has 1 aspirin left, and the guard by the gate has 2 cigarettes and a private economy that will not accept kindness as currency. The foreman rings the bell again at shift's end. The vats exhale. Somewhere else a ship slides into a green river and noses toward the sea. If you charted it all on one sheet, vials per day, ships per week, tablets per man per month, the arcs would scribe a verdict that a prisoner could not yet imagine. Industrial democracy has decided to make mercy routine. When a number gets that big, it stops being a statistic and becomes weather. Weather moves armies, weather ends droughts, weather seeps through a locked door in its own time. Tomorrow, the bell will ring again. In a hut 8,000 miles away, Doc will pick up his chalk. The distance between those two gestures is the span of a war, and the bridge between them is being laid in shifts. The road shines like hammered tin under a sky so bright it feels hollow. Boots slap dust into powder. Somebody's canteen thumps an empty rhythm against a hip with every step, like a metronome that has forgotten the song. The death march is less a column than a weather system moving north past ditches full of discarded helmets and the dead men who wore them. The distance varies by where a man was swept into the tide, 66 to 100 kilometres, but the arithmetic of thirst does not change. Heat like a kiln, humidity that drinks you as you drink it, and guards who take water personally. Doc Harlan counts by landmarks now. The culvert where a boy shoved a cup through slats and nearly lost his arm to a rifle butt. The stand of palms that looked like a postcard from any other angle. The flat stretch where the wind refused to stir and a man began to talk to a cloud as if it were a mule he could coax forward. The march has physics, mass, inertia, friction, and it shows its work in the streak of salt down a private's back and the way a sergeant walks like he has borrowed bones a size too small. At San Fernando, the boxcars wait with their flaked paint and their doors slid open like mouths ready to swallow. Men crush inside until there is no air left to share. The breath goes stale and then strange. Urine runs down ankles in a warm silk nobody will forget. A man faints and stands again because falling does not create room. The physics will not yield. If you put numbers to it, and someone will, the cubic feet per man will come out as a joke without a punchline. Someone prays into someone else's shoulder. Someone curses a map he has never seen. A guard laughs at something that is not funny even to him. The train rattles north toward Carpas, where roads veer toward the camp like capillaries to a wound. Fields blur by in a colour so green it insults the mouth with how much water lives there. A farmer pauses with his blade raised and watches the train with his face stripped of expression the way a man removes his hat in church. He will step back into the rice and the day will fold around him, but for a moment he will carry the rattle of the boxcar door in his ribs like a trapped bee. The gate at O'Donnell does not welcome so much as accept. The shock is not its height but its competence. The wire is straight. The posts stand with military posture. Inside, space contracts. A man can feel it in his knees when he steps off the truck. He did not believe a day could be hotter. The day instructs him otherwise. He did not know the smell of a camp with too little water. The camp explains. He will learn the price of shade. He will learn that a guard's joke can be a kind of currency if the joke is about someone else. Some men will not make it past the gate. Some will make it to a bunk and never leave it again. Doc Harlan will boil water, and Luce will smuggle another aspirin in brown paper, and Lieutenant Nakamura will balance columns until they hum. The march will become a memory stored in bone, a rope burn around the mind that tightens at night. The road will teach them the logic of distance, how far it is from one shade to the next, from one breath to the next, from one kindness to the next. Years later, people will say, Death March, as if it were a single day with clean edges. It is not. It is a set of rules that turn men into numbers by attrition. It is a geography class with consequences. It is the moment a soldier learns that doctrine without mercy is a machine that runs on bodies. He will learn it at a culvert where a boy risks a cup, and at a boxcar door that shuts without malice because malice would take energy, and at a gate where the sun does not trip for anyone. When the column breaks at the camp, someone will try to laugh, a reflex like sneezing. Someone else will try to count the steps back to where he began. Most will lie down because lying down is a kind of physics too. Harlan will wash his hands and begin again. Luce will find an open palm for the aspirin and a knot of bread for the man who can swallow. Nakamura will inspect the padlock and feel better about the world because the hasp is tight. That night the boxcars breathe out their heat like ovens cooling. The road settles its dust. A dog barks at nothing and keeps barking because barking is what dogs do when the world has tilted. In the hut, the chalk waits on the stretcher slat for the hand that has learned the shape of the number it will write in the morning. Outside, the stars watch with the cool governance of things that will outlast men. The lesson is not finished. The lesson is never finished. It only changes classrooms. Morning light skates across the hospital row and makes a lie of cleanliness. The huts are swept. The basins are scrubbed. The smell insists on the truth. Water is short, bodies are long, and the ledger has limits you can feel with your hands. O'Donnell is a factory of subtraction, and the conveyor belts run through men's bellies and veins. When the camp's rhythm slows, the administration speeds it up by transferring survivors to Cabanatuan as if a new address might loosen the math. It will not. It will change the numerator and the denominator, and the fraction will hold. Doc Harlan moves through the ward in a pattern he has memorized the way a sailor learns a deck in the dark. He checks ankles for doughy swelling, watches eyes for the glassy stare that means fever has moved in with luggage, feels for a liver edge that has no business being there. He boils water, the one alchemy available to enlisted men without requisition forms. When he can save a man, the method is simple. Water, rest, clean cloth, food if there is any, prayer if a man asks for it. When he cannot, the method is the same minus the outcome, and he marks the stretcher slat with the chalk. Luce carries her market in pockets. Aspirin in paper twists, a spoon's worth of rice folded into a rag, a note with a name to be memorized and carried out again so a family will have a word to put around their grief. At the gate, she asks politely again for the Red Cross truck to be admitted. The guard looks past her as if staring at the horizon might hurry the weather. "Regulations," he says, and she nods because she has learned that nodding draws less attention than truth. Later, she will count her coins and buy a little more rice because numbers, not noble speeches, keep people alive. Lieutenant Nakamura inspects the hospital row with his hands behind his back. He reads the ration scale like a navigator reads a chart. He adjusts the sickbay limit by 1 line because he believes he has been generous. He refuses to sign a request for sulphur because the garrison hospital needs it and because he has been told by men whose faces he will never see that military units in the field take precedence over prisoners. He balances columns and feels peace bloom the way a fisherman feels contentment when a net closes clean. At Cabanatuan, the geography is different and the arithmetic is the same. The huts breathe in and out with the heat. The latrines call flies the way salt calls sweat. The men learn to sleep on angles that take the pressure off the hip bone. They learn that the monsoon is not weather, but a season with laws. Cholera rides the first hard rains, dysentery spikes when the ditches overtop, and the cookhouse floor becomes a damp ledger that prints feet in brown. The water discipline Americans are taught in manuals becomes a joke told by men without soap. Harlan writes letters in his head to families whose names he does not know. He composes them like case notes: date, diagnosis, devotions offered when requested, a name spoken aloud, a prayer he can never remember exactly. He does not write them on paper because paper is a form of hope the camp does not stock. He keeps the letters in his bones. It is not good record-keeping. It is what he has. He can picture the kind of file a stateside hospital would keep, neat as a new haircut, and the envy surprises him the way memory does. When men die, the detail moves them with the respect repetition breeds. The shovel's metal lip clicks on a stone, and the sound rings deeper than it should. Someone says a line from a psalm. Someone else says nothing because words have been spent by noon. The cemetery grows in rows like a field planted late. Numbers creep across everything: bodies per day, rations per man, hours of labour available for details. The daily tally at O'Donnell once reached 44. The figure ploughs a furrow in Harlan's mind deeper than any plough ever cut in Iowa soil. Transfers feel like mercy until you learn what the road and the guards do to a man already tired. The sick are left behind or die en route. The strong are thinned to make them manageable. The arithmetic invites you to believe in fairness, input, output, balance. But balance is a knife here, not a scale. It cuts the line between the men who will live long enough to ride a truck again and the men whose names will travel home on someone else's tongue. At dusk, Luce walks past the hospital row and counts breaths by habit. She knows the sound of a fever breaking, the little hitch in the second breath that says the body has rejoined the fight. She knows the quiet that is not rest. She folds a note small and pushes it into a knot behind a post where a runner will find it after dark. She keeps a ledger too, but hers is in a pocket and written in a careful hand, and it balances only one thing: the debt she believes she owes the men who say "thank you," as if the words were the only currency worth saving. Harlan sets the chalk down and stares at his hand. It has learned the weight of numbers. He flexes his fingers as if that might teach them names again. Somewhere, he thinks, there must be a place where medicine is not a rumour. Somewhere the ledger opens outward. He cannot imagine the scale. He can only imagine the sound: a bell at shift change, a whistle across water, the gentle clink of glass against glass as vials kiss inside a crate. The first rain comes on like an argument no one wants to have. Fat drops drum the tin and bounce off the packed earth in little crowns. The air cools for a minute and the camp breathes as if someone has opened a window in a locked room. Then the ditches fill and the latrines describe their limits and the hospital row learns a new scent: the sharp, fast stink of cholera arriving with the efficiency of a schedule. What the manuals warn about, the weather insists upon. The season is not an event, but an occupying force. Doc Harlan watches a fever climb with the steady cruelty of a gauge on a boiler that will not vent. He boils water because boiling works until it does not. He rigs a filter from a tin and cloth because filtration works until the cloth is more germ than cloth. He teaches men to drink slow and to lie on their sides and to keep their mouths wet, advice so old it has no inventor and so good it might as well be doctrine. In another army on another front, a corpsman opens a pouch and shakes out sulphur as casually as salt on eggs. Here, Harlan improvises religion from rags. Luss knows the monsoon by the shape of the road. The shoulders give way first, then the ruts turn into trenches, then the trench water moves like a sullen animal that finds its own way around orders. She walks with her skirt hitched and carries aspirin above her head in a twist of brown paper, passing guards who have learned to hate rain because it makes the night noisier and the prisoners softer underfoot. She brings a list of names to remember and a knot of bread that will not last until noon. She threads the day like a needle and tries not to snag. Lieutenant Nakamura stares at a small map where latrines are neat squares and cookhouses neat rectangles and the hospital row a tidy band near the road. He orders a new pit dug farther from the kitchens and believes for an hour that the diagram has solved the season. The rain redraws the map without asking permission. Flies follow the new lines with doctrinal zeal. He adjusts the sickbay limit because adjustments feel like command. He sets a work detail to carry sand for a trench that will not hold. He sleeps badly and tells himself the army fights weather the way it fights men, with order. There is a number that belongs to another world, and it moves through this one like a rumour in clean boots. Penicillin units, not in thousands or millions, but in billions, and then in figures that make a clerk check the column heading twice. In a single American year, the count will leap so high that a plant will bottle more medicine in a week than some nations could imagine producing in a year. 1 hour of one line's output will exceed a month of what an enemy hospital could beg from a tight-fisted quartermaster. It sounds like myth until you load a ship and count the boxes. It sounds like boasting until you lay the graphs side by side and the lines argue in ink. The men do not see the graphs. They see a clear bucket turn cloudy when the first tin beaker dips from the wrong side of a ditch. They see a guard slap a man for vomiting near the work party because vomit is disorder now. They see Luce walk the mud like a tightrope artist and tuck a paper twist into a hand that shakes less after swallowing. They see Doc's face when he hears the word cholera for the first time in days and realizes he has said it aloud. They see the way he says, "We can keep you here," as if walls could help. A plane drones high and indifferent. It could be American, it could be Japanese. At that height, allegiance is a matter of paint, not doctrine. The sound makes a guard look up and a prisoner look down into his own bucket to keep from saying something that would earn him a rifle stock to the shoulder. Harlan holds a cup to a man's lips and tips it slow. He speaks in a calm that would have sounded like kindness in another place, and here sounds like command, given softly, which is all command is when a man can choose not to swallow. When night comes, it does not cool so much as thicken. The rain slows, then gathers itself, then slaps the roofs in a new rhythm that erases the old. The hospital hut breathes in time with it. Somewhere far away, a factory whistle blows for a shift that will walk into light and noise and purpose and will lay hands on machines that make life. Somewhere far away, a clerk stamps a manifest, and a winch begins to sing, and a ship leans away from a wharf as if eager to learn the ocean. In the hut, Harlan thinks about the shape of abundance as a kind of weather that moves across charts and across months and arrives like rain on men who have forgotten what dry feels like. He thinks about the lock and the ledger and the arithmetic of refusal. He thinks about a number big enough to force a door from the outside. He presses a damp cloth to a brow and listens for the hitch in the second breath that means a fever has decided to step back. He waits. Waiting is a tactic here, and patience is a weapon as sharp as anything the quartermaster issues. The hatchboards slam like coffin lids, and the ladder goes up with a scrape that sounds too much like laughter. Heat hits from four sides, iron, bodies, breath, the Pacific sun planking down through a seam of light that pretends to be air. The hold tastes of rust and old rice and something sharp from the buckets that already slosh at the corners. A corporal counts heads by tens, not to save anyone, only to prove a form is accurate. The ship shudders as the harbour lets go, and a rumour runs the length of the darkness that men are stacked in the aft hold the same way. The rumour is true, it will be true again on the next ship and the next. Doc Harlan is not aboard. Fever saved him or chose him. He would have said either, in that careful conditional POWs used to bargain with memory. He watched the column go from Cabanatuan, men stepping with the stiffness of men who know the end of a line better than the beginning. He stood by the gate with a bucket he was not allowed to give them and pretended he could not see their faces. The guards drove the last file with rifle butts and a joke about swift voyages. A guard can hate a voyage despite the joke. A guard is still a man who knows what heat does below decks. The men below invent weather to explain time. At noon, the iron breathes inward, and the air moves like a creature too tired to hunt. At dusk, the hatch tilts. Someone shouts, a rope creaks, and an arm lowers a canvas sack of rice that carries more weevils than calories. A bucket goes up and comes down with a slop of water you could smell from the far end of the hold if your nose were not already numb. They pass it hand to hand. The gods of buckets demand accuracy and speed, and the ability not to care that a hand touched your lip that just held vomit. If mathematics had a taste, it would taste like this: salt and iron and the little sweetness of stale grain. Above, a man scans a horizon that belongs to no one now. The ship is unmarked. There is no red cross on the stack to tell a pilot what cargo groans below. The convoy plods because plodding is survival, and survival is a margin measured in knots and luck. Somewhere there is a submarine crew reading silhouettes off a card, training a periscope on shapes that resolve to rectangles and masts and the sickness of a decision. The crew cannot read a soul from this range. They cannot smell the hold. They can only do what war has trained them to do. Rumours filter back to camp in fragments Doc has to glue into sequence. Orioku, Inara, Brazil, names that sound like postcards until you measure them by the hours men spent with their faces in someone else's shoulder to keep from falling. And then the one that arrives as a number without a name because numbers can carry more weight without syllables to slow them. 1,781 boarded, 9 survived. If you wrote that as a fraction, it would look like cruelty teaching arithmetic to a child. Guards whisper, too. Even guards have cousins who heard things at the port. A guard spits and says the sea is hungry. He is not wrong, but he is not right in a way that matters. In the hold, the air congeals around a fight for a square foot of floor that a feverish man thought was shade. There is no shade, only a trick of the angle. The fight burns out when one man stops moving except for the slow tilt of his head. Someone belts him to a stanchion with a piece of rope to keep him from being trampled. Someone else takes the belt because a belt is a tool that can tighten a bucket handle. Necessity pulls decency into strange shapes. In another war, on another front, a field manual would list the order of operations for medical triage. Here, triage is a set of verbs: lift, brace, pass, hold. At night, the hatch remains closed because the guard on deck would rather listen to a quiet that is not quiet than risk a rush toward air. The ship's engine throbs through the bones as if trying to thrum men back into a beat they can march to. Hymns become rope ladders whispered one rung at a time, then forgotten because forgetting is as merciful as remembering is not. Someone recites a baseball lineup from a year before the war and is corrected gently on the left fielder's name, and the argument comforts 20 men who no longer care about left field. When the torpedoes come to some ships, and they will, The wake begins as a thread of white like a gull's feather and ends as a body blow that turns the air to knives. On others, the heat kills without concussive punctuation. The logbook ashore will note both events with the same line weight. In camp, Doc hears a story of a man who climbed a ladder at dawn and blinked into a world the colour of pewter, then felt a hand on his ankle and a word he had not heard in years, brother, and the way the word pulled him back into the darkness because leaving without the hand would have been treason. Weeks later, a truck will bring back fewer men than left. The ones who return smell like a boiler room and salt. They talk in the past tense more often than they should. Doc listens, then hands over water and a clean rag and the luxury of not talking. He looks at the road where the column marched out and thinks of a map that ends in water and of ships that made choices without markings to guide them. Doctrine has many languages. Sometimes it speaks with paint, sometimes with silence. The rumours do not stop. Numbers grow legs and run back down the road from the port, and men turn them into prayers or curses according to temperament. At night, Doc dreams of hatchboards he has never touched and wakes with a hand gripping an ankle that is not there, and he says the word brother because there are not many words that earn their keep here. In the morning, he boils water again because that is a miracle he is permitted. A siren on the river mouth yowls the shift awake, and the keel in the cradle creaks forward as wedges slam free and 1,000 hands become one shove. The Liberty ship slides like a barn door opening onto the Atlantic, her designation stenciled sharp, EC2SC1, letters and numbers that feel like good luck charms to men who have never worn charms. Bands play a tune that knows how to keep time, and a welder with a sunburn under her goggles grins like a woman who just put a roof on a storm. Downstream, another hull waits for christening. Upstream, a bowline tightens on a finished ship that is already loading wheat, gasoline, ammunition, and crates stamped with a simple word that has become a strategy: penicillin. If you wrote the shipyard in poetry, you would write it as repetition. Keel blocks, frames, plates, rivets, welds that look like minnows frozen in silver swimming upriver. The yard foreman carries a clipboard the way a battery commander carries a fire plan. His arcs are measured in tonnage, in days saved, in the way a bottleneck vanishes when a crane is moved 10 feet and a man with a wrench becomes a man with a torch. He can recite the schedule of the tide by heart, and the schedule of trains that feed his ways, and the names of the tug skippers who can set a stern where he asks without a second try. The numbers tell their own story without drum rolls. 2,000, then more, until the figure rounds at 2,700 and keeps walking because other hulls with other names join the procession. Construction times collapse, from months to weeks to days in the best yards, until a crew swears they can smell tomorrow in the paint. One yard will launch more tonnage in a single week than an enemy ministry could credibly replace in a season. Another will set a record that feels like lying until a reporter counts the slips and shrugs. Victory is the ordinary done faster than a clockmaker can object. On the platform inside a pharmaceutical plant, the vats bubble light as bread dough, and the man in the white coat reads a gauge and signs a log with a calm that looks like liturgy. He knows the curve the world will later memorize. Units in 1943 measured in the tens of billions. Units in 1944 in the trillions. By 1945, the figure has climbed into a place where numbers stop sounding like medicine and start sounding like weather. He does not need metaphor. He needs sterility and a clean bottling line and the surety that the railroad will keep the schedule it promised. The quartermaster will call this Class 8. The men who open the tins will call it luck. Boxes with the smell of printer's ink ride slings into a hold where netting balances like a circus act. A boatswain's whistle cuts the clank to a clear line. A nurse in a port hospital checks a manifest and underlines destinations in pencil. She has never been to the Pacific and will never go, but she understands tide tables and the gravity of sick rooms. She can tell from a column of figures How many fevers will not spike next month? She knows Atterbreen will turn a battalion's skin a soft jaundice the way liver turns, and she does not care, and neither will the battalion if the shivers don't come. An LST yawns open its steel mouth and swallows trucks, bulldozers, boxes. The Navy paints numbers and argues loading plans with the Quartermaster Corps the way birds argue over wire until they take off together. The convoy assembles with an etiquette that has been learned under fire, spacing that thwarts submarines, escorts that know the difference between a whale spout and a periscope feathered by a chop, zigzags that look silly on a map and brilliant on a morning after no one died. The sea is no kinder than it was last year. The difference is arithmetic and the persistence of men with clipboards. In the infantry battalion training south of San Francisco, a medic shakes out sulfur like a man salting a steak, and no one treats it as a miracle anymore. The men have been told what to carry: field dressings, packets, morphine in syrettes that look like tweaking a hornet, and what to swallow whether they feel like swallowing or not. Atterbreen discipline saves units. Men who complain learn to like living. The armourer checks racks of M1 rifles that sting the palm with their clean balance and a BAR that sounds like a door slamming when it talks. The kit feels like confidence because it is. By the time the convoy has cleared the headland and chosen blue water, the production numbers have stopped feeling like news. They are background, like weather on a station farmers leave on while they eat. The improbable has rounded into routine. A Liberty ship slides off the ways at noon, another at dusk. At midnight, a foghorn finds its own echo in the river bend and tests the air for danger. The river answers with a gull's complaint and the slap of a tug's wake on pilings, then with the long hush of a tide that is going the correct way. Somewhere on Luzon, a young woman folds a paper twist of aspirin and tucks it into a pocket. Somewhere in a hut, a medic boils a tin of water and imagines a bottle with a fluted stopper and a label that smells of printer's ink and victory. He cannot know the rate at which vials are sliding into straw in a warehouse that will be empty by morning. He cannot count ships he will never see. He can count breaths, and he does, and the numbers are not good. The bridge between these worlds is measured in days and in the stubborn refusal of schedules to miss themselves. At sunset on the river, the cranes fall still and the bands walk home, and the yard lights come on like a second constellation. A boy leans on a fence and watches the new ship ride her own wake and imagines the world past the bar. He does not think about math. He is math, moving into tomorrow. The first note is written in footprints, rangers easing through elephant grass a hand's breadth at a time while a night insect saws the air. On the horizon, a black shape makes bedding out of the sky. A night fighter working a deception pattern, low passes to persuade the garrison that all dangers fly. The men on the ground, about 120 of them from the 6th Ranger Battalion, creep forward into a field no commander would choose in daylight, a swale of open ground that dares a searchlight to blink. Captain Robert Prince lies on his belly and leads with a compass. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci lies 2 men back and leads by memory. Doc Harlan waits behind wire he can taste when the wind is right. The camp has learned the difference between the sound of boredom and the sound of intent. Boredom is a poker game in a guardhouse. Intent is boots that match each other. He does not call for quiet because quiet would be theatre. His men are past theatre. He thinks he hears a low buzzing above the camp that is not a mosquito and understands it as a letter written to the guards, look up, not down. On the road to the east, Filipino guerrillas under Captains Juan Pajota and Eduardo Joson move into positions that have been rehearsed the way a hymn repeats until it feels memorized in the bones. They will block the Japanese relief columns at the Kabu River and on the road nets that converge on the camp. Their rifles are clean, their plans cleaner. They have mapped the river's depth with bamboo poles and the patience of men who have been ready a very long time. Prince's watch face is the most important piece of equipment in Luzon for exactly 3 minutes. At the wire, cutters tremble. A ranger whispers a count, and the men flow the way water finds a breach. When the first shots crack, they are not fireworks. They are punctuation, short and mean. Towers wink into silence as if wired to the same switch. A guard runs the wrong direction and meets a private who has rehearsed this distance until his feet could do it without knees. The hospital hut blinks awake, men pushing up on elbows too used to lying down. Harlan's world changes with a whisper. "Doc, we brought medicine." The first packet of sulphur he has seen in nearly 3 years rests in his palm like an egg he refuses to break. He slides it into a pocket because denial has become reflex, then pulls it back out because the reflex is now obsolete. A ranger presses a chocolate bar into a hand the size of a bird. A man cries because the wrapper crackles. The sound of wrappers will be discussed for years as if it qualified as a weapon. In the guardhouse, a ledger finally goes unused. Nakamura is not here. He has fled with the confidence of a man who believes the future is a line he can will into straightness. The lines tonight belong to other pencils. A ranger squad clears hut to hut with the practiced courtesy of men who know that shouting wastes breath and time. Prisoners stumble toward the breach, toward carts that creak with the patience of carabao and the reins of farmers who have waited all day by a tree pretending to admire bark. The exfiltration looks like fiction if you draw it to scale. Carts, a moon that refuses to pick a side, rangers in files so thin they borrow each other's shadows, guerrillas holding a bridge with a competence that surprises no one who has been paying attention. The road takes the weight and gives it back, one axle at a time. Men die on carts because bodies do not consult schedules. Red Matheson keeps the line moving with a voice set 1 decibel above fear. When a man falls, 2 lift. When a wheel sinks, hands bloom from the dark to push. Numbers accompany them like saints. Over 500 souls pulled out of a place built to own them until they were numbers on a board. And a number that a ranger whispers to a prisoner when the prisoner stands blank beside a cart, unwilling to trust a sentence. "Arisan Maru," he says. 1,781 went aboard, 9 came home. This is what impossible looks like when it is true. A denominator so huge you cannot afford to think about it, and a numerator so small you can count it on your thumbs while you shake. Behind them, fires spend themselves and shouting turns into silence. Ahead, a river takes the weight of carts and men and the slow intelligence of animals. The night fighter makes one last pass as if signing a letter with a flourish. At dawn, the carts arrive where a line of American medics and Filipino nurses have arranged a welcome that looks like a miracle because it is. Bandages, broth, a table where names will be written correctly. The first sulphur packets are opened, the first morphine syrettes kissed through cloth like relics. By noon, the column has vanished into country that knows how to hide friends. The raid will hit radios and then papers, and then history. For now, it sits on the backs of animals, in the hands of men who did not shout because shouting was expensive, in the lives of prisoners who will spend the rest of their days learning how to be present, tense again. Harlan keeps 1 empty sulphur packet in his pocket, flat as a pressed leaf. It crackles when he touches it, and for once the sound is not a dream. The room smells like paper and wool, and the ghost of smoke that lives in any building full of men and decisions. A clerk lays a thick book on the table, the camp ledger that travelled further in a briefcase than most of its subjects travelled alive. The pages settle with a sigh. On another table, a Red Cross manifest lies under a paperweight shaped like a globe, the irony unremarked. The prosecutor lifts a page with 2 fingers, as if the weight of a single line could bend bone. He does not read names first. He reads categories. Categories are what made this book possible. Witnesses stand in a light that apologizes for itself. Doc Harlan lifts a hand and swears and tells the story in the tense a medic uses when he will not give a disease credit for permanence. Men presented with symptoms consistent with dysentery and malaria and beriberi. Sulphur was not issued. quinine was withheld. Admissions to hospital huts were restricted to a limit set by an officer who introduced himself with a ledger. He uses likely when the record will not bear the weight of certainty, and would have when he maps a treatment he can name, but did not hold in his hand in time. The defence counsel touches a button on his sleeve the way a man touches a worry stone and asks about scarcity, about operational priorities, about the Empire's view that military units in contact take precedence over prisoners. He reaches for Senjin-kun as if a code could stand in the dock and take the sentence. He cites an ocean full of submarines and an air full of planes as if weather occurred naturally. He suggests that a guard who turned a truck away did not know what was in the boxes. The court listens because listening is what makes this not a firing squad. A historian testifies to a calculus that does not apologize. Allied POW mortality in Japanese hands, about 27%, versus roughly 4% in German custody. American figures often higher still, not because Americans died better or worse, but because shipping captives through unmarked seas added a category of death that a ledger could only summarize in tidy numbers. He lays the Arisan number down without theatrics. 1,781 embarked, 9 to speak for them, and let silence work as argument. Nakamura stands where the light finds the sheen on his hair. He admits the ledger is his. He explains that sick bay limits maintain order, that hospital admissions sap labour, that rations cannot be conjured from ink. He says the Empire did not ratify Geneva. He says the army taught him to prize discipline above indulgence. When he reaches for compassion, the word arrives in his mouth like a button he never learned to fasten. He says he kept lists because lists are how a man keeps the world from becoming a rumour. Evidence arrives in parcels, a list of Red Cross shipments that left ports and were never logged at camps. The testimony of a porter who watched supplies diverted. A copy of a memorandum where an officer justified withholding sulphur because prisoners were expendable labour and soldiers were assets. The memorandum is not dramatic. It is terrifying in inverse proportion to its tone. It balances columns and leaves out only the weather and the smell and the names. The tribunal does not try a culture. It tries choices made in uniforms. A judge asks a question about May 31st. Why 44 deaths in one day in one camp? And the answer is a line of weather and policy and the arithmetic of refusal. He nods once, not because he agrees, but because the math squares. The prosecutor does not move to the rail to shout. He places a page on top of another page and lets weight do what weight does. Outside, the world is already moving on. Shipyards have shifted to peacetime orders. The penicillin line hums, but will soon learn civilian demand with civilian pricing and civilian patience. In hospitals, medics who once learned to improvise now learn to document. In mess halls, cartons of Atabrine are reboxed or burned. Mosquitoes still fly, indifferent to treaties. In classrooms, a line on a map called Death March will become a quiz item that can be answered with a date and a distance that flatten sweat to a digit. The verdict arrives as a paragraph read in a voice that refuses ceremony, guilty on counts that name neglect and refusal and misappropriation and murder by policy. Sentences follow as if they could fill holes in the ground retroactively. They cannot. They can only set a boundary for a future court to measure by. Afterward, the clerk closes the ledger and carries it away. It weighs the same as it did in the morning, but everyone who watched it move swears it makes the arm ache worse. Harlan steps into a corridor that smells like disinfectant and old coffee and leans his forehead against cool plaster the way a man cools metal to keep it from warping. He thinks about a chalk nub that lived too long in his pocket. He thinks about a sulphur wrapper he flattened and kept. He thinks about the arithmetic that tried to turn names into columns and the arithmetic that turned columns into charges. When he walks out into light, he does not look for ceremony. He looks for a bench where he can sit and memorize the names he did not write down before they fade. Imagine 4 lines on butcher paper pinned to a wall, grease pencil squeaking like a field telephone. The first line spikes, then steadies, then spikes where the monsoon scythed through latrines. Daily deaths at a camp that should have been a way station and became a destination. The second plunges when a river of boxes began to move. Sulphur, atabrina, bandages, procedures turning into muscle memory. Malaria rates on American fronts dropping as discipline and pills made a doctrine out of disgust. The third rises in a curve that leaves arithmetic behind. Penicillin units from tens of billions to trillions in a single year, then again up into a cloud of zeros that looks like a blizzard standing still. The fourth is a step function in steel, hulls laid down, launched, loaded, convoyed, the Liberty curve filling a sea that had looked lost. A staff officer would call this a briefing, a chaplain might call it testimony, an old sergeant would call it proof that discipline is logistics written on behaviour. The graph that shows Allied POW mortality under Japanese control at roughly 27% does not include smell or heat or bucket lines. It includes, in its way, the decision not to paint a cross on a stack and the decision to padlock a dispensary and call it order. The graph that shows roughly 4% under German custody is not mercy. It is an economy with rail cars that did other things to other people, a different indictment entirely. You can plot the Cabanatuan raid as a point on this paper, but a point does not look like men crawling through grass that whispers. It does not carry the cool taste of sulphur when the tablet dissolves on a tongue that forgot sweetness. It does not carry the sound of a Carabao cart's bearing when it surrenders and is levered back with a pry bar older than the road. A point also does not carry the fact that the rescue travelled on rails laid by penicillin factories and liberty slips. Without the conveyor behind it, courage ends at the fence. America's abundance looks impersonal on paper because numbers are democratic in their rudeness. The miracle is that the systems learned to hand miracles to individuals at the right moment. A medic with a siret is the end point of a chain that includes a machinist filing a burr off a pump impeller in a plant where shift whistles make no music, and a welder who stitched a hull that could carry more medical tonnage in a week than an empire allowed into every camp in a year. Capacity is compassion in a uniform with pockets. The Japanese graphs, if drawn honestly, would show scarcity ossified into doctrine. A line for shipping capacity bends downward after 1942 as submarines and aircraft took bites out of convoys that had no escorts to spare. A line for medical stores at the front wobbles and then breaks as priorities moved from hospitals to holding operations that tried to wring more labour from men in uniforms and men without them. A line for ideology holds flat longer than it should have because codes have inertia. When scarcity meets belief, belief often wins until both are broke. There is an odd tenderness in graphs that turn into lessons for peacetime. The Army Medical Department will write malaria discipline into training, not as superstition, but as a standard. You do not skip atabrine the way you do not skip a password at a post gate. Medevac emerges as doctrine, then as reflex. Supply officers learn that a broken cold chain can kill a platoon more effectively than enemy small arms. Their graphs will include refrigeration tonnage and generator fuel, and a note in the margin about redundant gaskets, because a gasket can be a campaign. Harlan looks at a chart in a hospital classroom years later and hears the chalk sing. He watches an instructor draw the penicillin curve and thinks of a hut where glass vials lived only in his head. He watches a convoy curve and thinks of a road where carts outperformed trucks because trucks were rare and loud and carts were patient and tuned to fields. He wants to stand and say that curves are made of people, not just numbers. He does not stand. The instructor does the work for him without knowing it, telling a room full of medics that the reason you inventory your kit is that a missing packet at the wrong hour is a hole in the line as real as a gap in a trench. There is a final graph no one pins up because it is untidy, the slope of memory. It rises after the war, then declines as men with first-hand knowledge age, then flickers upward as archives open and grandchildren discover letters in boxes and ask better questions. Numbers keep their edges longer than words, but words carry the scent. The work is to keep both. The work is to teach a private with a kit bag that he carries the end of a national sentence. If the graphs accuse, they also absolve in the only way absolution makes sense in history, by warning. The lesson is that mercy must be stocked and scheduled, that compassion needs conveyor belts, that a democracy's promise is not poetry unless a quartermaster believes it, and a plant manager believes it, and a medic believes it enough to open a packet on time. The lines on the wall jackknife upward and all at once look like hands. The hospital ship's deck smells like salt and disinfectant, and the crate with the penicillin stencil sits in sunlight as if it were a small chapel with pews made of glass. A corpseman peels a label, checks a dosage, and hands a vial to a nurse who has already warmed a man's arm with a towel she wrung out of a basin that steamed like a kitchen. Doc Harlan, older now in the way a man is older when he has memorized the taste of dust, reads names aloud from a clipboard because names must walk back into mouths to be real again. He knows better than to trust paper alone. The world has already taught him what paper will do when asked to carry souls. Luz Alonso stands at the rail with a scarf pinned tight against a breeze that tastes of open water and future. She looks at the wake and thinks of roads that were ruts and of a gate where the guard pretended he could not see her on days he chose not to be cruel. She folds a letter in her pocket, a letter she wrote to herself with the names of men she carried past suspicion and a tally of aspirin she wishes had been heavier. She traces the curve of the shoreline with a finger as if the land were a friend waving from a platform as a train steps out of sight. In an office where windows are maps, a colonel briefs a room of young officers who will inherit a doctrine and make it flesh. He uses words like standard issue and cold chain and evacuation corridor, and he does not apologize for logistics because he understands what victory looks like when a convoy arrives exactly on time and a fever fails to spike because a pill schedule held. He tells them that in 1943 industry counted penicillin in tens of billions of units, and that by 1944 the count had jumped into the trillions, a curve so steep it made factories out of pharmacies and mercy into a resource. He tells them, without drama, that the country launched more than 2,700 Liberty ships in 4 years, and that the sea learned their names like a litany. Nakamura reads his sentence in a room without music. He stands with the posture of a man who believes posture is the last dignity left. He does not ask for mercy from a system he once dismissed as indulgent. He tells himself the ledger kept men fed as long as it could, and sometimes he believes it. He knows that belief is not a defence. When he closes his eyes, the padlock on the dispensary is the thing that gleams. It gleams too brightly. He tries to imagine a world where abundance is policy and cannot. His mind is a room with neat corners and a window that looks onto rain that does not stop. On a dock in Oakland, a civilian worker hammers shut a crate that will ride a ship as dull as a delivery truck. The crate holds gauze and morphine and syrettes and powdered milk and a stack of field orders that turn kindness into checklists. The worker signs a manifest with a pencil that has been sharpened too many times and notices the date. He has a brother who came home with a malaria that left and came back like a neighbour who borrows tools. He has a sister who wore goggles and a flame-retardant scarf and learned to weld a seam prettier than jewellery. He does not think of strategy. He thinks of the way paper will guide a crane, and a crane will guide a load, and the load will vanish into a ship's belly, and then into a hospital, and then into a body that will not die this week. A statistic travels like rumour to people who make a home in numbers. By 1945, America's pharmaceutical output of penicillin was so vast that an hour on a single line could dose a division's worth of infections that would once have been funerals. The number sits beside another that veterans carry without graphs. Prisoners rescued at Cabanatuan, numbering in the hundreds, crossing a river on carts built before the internal combustion engine, saved by a system that could produce in a month more shipping than an enemy could protect in a year. These juxtapositions sound impossible until you think about how many hands touched a single sulfur packet before it reached a mouth. Harlan visits a classroom and holds up the flattened wrapper he kept like a pressed leaf. He tells young medics that doctrine is a love letter written to people you will never meet. He tells them that in a camp a day could carry 44 bodies, and that a lock could stand between a man and a vial, and that mercy depends on supply as much as on sentiment. He uses would have when he sketches the patients he could have saved with sulphur, and likely when he maps the way Atterbury discipline turns a swamp into a field of duty instead of a grave. Luz walks a street in Tarlac where a market has returned with laughter and complaints about prices, the evidence of peace. She buys rice without counting the grains and carries aspirin without hiding it. She writes letters for families who never learned to see a signature as a small sacrament. At night she lights a candle for the men who were numbers and then were names again, and for the men who did not live to hear themselves called present. The ship's horn sounds as it noses into open water, a long, low note that feels like breath. On deck the crate is opened, and glass answers light with light. The nurse tilts a vial and watches a bubble climb after the stopper, a tiny moon rising. The corpseman taps a syringe, a ritual as old as trust. The flag lifts at the stern, not triumphant, only certain. The wake pulls a white line across blue like chalk on slate, and for once Doc Harlan is glad of chalk, because chalk is how lessons are taught, and lessons kept, and names written big enough that even men at the back can see them and stand when called.